Welcome viewers in our continuing series of Guru Purnima. Today we have back with us James Braha. His video with us, Moon in the Seventh from the Moon, was a much loved video. And today, Sir is going to teach us something very important about the sutras, the book he's writing. He will tell us something about those sutras and plus Uranus. Sir, welcome. Happy Guru Purnima to you. In advance, and a happy Guru Purnima to all my teachers on all my channels. Thank you.
Okay, so I don't know how many people follow my videos, but most people know I'm working on a book now called the Braha Sutras, yes. And I've written about 215. They go all over the place. They're all different issues, and it should be done. I'm hoping that in 2 or 3, maybe 3 months, it might be a finished book. I'm going over editing them now, but I wanted to just mention a few of these things, and then we can get into Uranus. And it is, in the book, in the sutras book, I talk about, one of the sutras is that the best way to learn about astrology is to do as many horoscopes as you can. To do as many horoscopes as you can. However, there are certain things that have to be taken into consideration when you're doing those horoscopes. And one of them is that you cannot do a horoscope without using the Bhava chart. It just won't work. It'll work if the person has an ascendant that's 10, 15, 20 degrees, it'll work. But if it's a very early degree ascendant within the first 5 or 6 degrees, or if it's in the last 5 or 6 degrees, then you're going to have planets that are so far away from the ascendant degree that doing horoscopes of people you know isn't going to help, because you're going to get things wrong simply because, if the ascendant is 2 degrees Cancer, and a person has a planet in 27 degrees Leo, that planet's going to be second house, but it's also going to be third house, both. So you have to understand that. And another thing about this is that if you're not using Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, there's going to be things that you miss because they're so critical. And one of the worst practices, and we all do it, especially in the beginning days, is that we assume that everything that occurs in life can be seen in the horoscope. And it's simply not true. And so what we do in the beginning days is we look for things. Oh, that's the reason it happened. Oh, that's the reason it happened. And it just is nonsense. Sometimes, now, a lot of times, it takes 30 or 40 years of experience to find things, but a lot of times, even with 30 or 40 years, it's not going to work. And one of the worst conditions is people using many horoscopes. This is huge. The problem of using the natal horoscope, the Bhava horoscope, the Chandra Lagna chart,
Surya Lagna.
The Chandra Lagna, Bhava chart, and then they use the Navamsha. Now you've got 4 charts for the natal chart. And out of those charts, the natal and the Bhava are the most, those to me are really all I use for the natal chart. I have not found Chandra Lagna to work for charts as a whole very well. I really haven't. But I have found planets 7 houses away from the moon to work perfectly. So I don't use Chandra Lagna. The idea of the Navamsha being used as a natal chart is just garbage in my experience. And I don't know who came up with the idea. In fact, it's on my mind because I don't read scriptures. In the beginning days, I read Parashara Horasara a little bit and Saravali, all these different ones. I just didn't get very much of it from those, but my teachers used the Navamsha as a chart, but I just use it for the 7th house, but I want to contact some of my friends that actually go from those scriptures and find out who mentioned using the Navamsha as the natal chart. I don't find that it works. I don't find that it works very much. Oh, in the Navamsha, this planet's in its own sign. I just don't find that to work very well. That aside, all of that aside, just think about this for a minute. The Navamsha and the Chandra Lagna are very traditional, as is the natal and the Bhava. Now, if you take the natal horoscope, you have 9 planets and 12 houses and 12 signs and 13 aspects. Okay, so it's a very difficult profession. Now you have to add the Bhava chart. And now you have 9 planets.
Yes, same.
And you have 12 signs and you have 12 houses. Now you add to that the Navamsha. And you have 9 planets and you have 12 houses and you have 12 signs. You don't have the aspects. Now you take, so you have the Navamsha, you have the Chandra Lagna. If you add up the combinations of what can occur with 9 planets, 12 houses, 12 signs, 13 aspects in 4 horoscopes, it's going to be in the millions, the combinations. And basically, it allows the astrologer to find anything he wants. Anything you want to find, you can find. Oh, he's wealthy and it doesn't show. Oh, there it is. It's in the Bhava. Oh, there it is. It's in the Navamsha. Oh, there it is. It's in. And it becomes, I know that I'm not going to stop people from using those because they're attached to them. But let's put a little wedge in your thinking. Let's put a little wedge there and just consider the millions of combinations that can allow you to find whatever you want to find. The next thing I want to say, and this is a sutra, but it's really the theme of the whole book, the Braha Sutras. The thought process is what matters. The thought process is what matters. The thought process is what matters. Now, what astrologers and students believe is that if they come and listen to these lectures, they're going to hear enough facts and techniques and tips that are going to give them what they need to be an astrologer. It will never work that way. It will never work that way. You can read 1,000 books. You can have the best teacher in the world. They can tell you this planet in this house means this. They can tell you how to do the transits. They can tell you whatever they want to tell you. Astrology is vast. It's vast. I'm in this for 40 years and I'm still seeing all kinds of combinations that I never saw before. It's not, and when you see them, you can't run to some book and say, what does it mean when the 5th house is good, but Jupiter is bad and Saturn aspects that house while Jupiter is near a fallen planet? There's nowhere to get that information. So this is critical if you're actually wanting to be an astrologer. You learn the techniques, you learn the information, and you learn the basics and the fundamentals as well as you can. But when you're looking at a horoscope and it becomes very confusing, you can't run to a teacher and say, what does this mean? It doesn't work that way. It becomes a process of your looking at it, analyzing it, contemplating it. And you know, there are some astrologers that do readings without preparing. Oh, I'm good enough. I can look at it 5 or 10 minutes before the reading. And I'll tell you something. In many cases, I can do that. If I have 10 or 15 minutes, I can get a lot. If the horoscope is a simple, clear horoscope. which is probably 20 or 30% of charts. Then you have some that are more complex. And then you have some that you look at them and you go, this is impossible. You cannot figure out what this means. It's impossible. It's too confusing. In those cases, you need contemplation. So you need to look at it a day before or a few days before because it's so complicated. And then when you're eating dinner, you remember it. You go, now, what was that? In other words, there's a process that has to take place. So in any case, it's the thought process that is so important. Then I want to mention that the first thing that you have to do, the very first thing that you have to do, is you have to look at the birth time. Is it on the hour or is it on the half hour? If it's on the hour or the half hour, stop. Don't even continue. Go to the client and say, where does the birth data come from? Oh, it's on the birth certificate. That's fine if it's on the birth certificate, but some countries, not the US, some countries in South America, China, some in India, they just write down the half hour and the hour. You need to look at that issue. Okay. The next thing that you have to look at is the ascendant 28 degrees or 29 degrees or 0 degrees, because then a 3 or 4 minute discrepancy throws the whole horoscope off. So this will sound annoying and complicating for beginner astrologers, but if you don't do that, you can be reading the wrong chart. You can be reading the wrong chart. And you may think that that's, you'll find out because they'll tell you, no, it's not accurate. That won't happen in most cases. In my first year, I remember doing, a horoscope for somebody. And then they come back the next day and say, oh my God, it was 4 hours off. Oh my God, it was 6 hours. Oh my God, it was PM instead of AM. And I'm thinking, does astrology work? Is this a real science, a real art? The problem is that if you get 20 people in a room and you read them all the same explanation of their horoscope, because the details are so specific, most of those people say, yes, that fits, even though it's not them. So anyway, that's just something that I think people should do right away. Another one of the sutras is about Dharma-Arth-Kaam-Moksha. And my teacher, Padya, I have a sutra about why he was a great teacher. He was a great teacher because he was still is, he's 80 years old now. He's completely experience oriented. He doesn't care what somebody says. He cares what he finds to work. And one day he came in and he said, I was realizing that Hindu life is divided into these 4 areas. So the horoscope must correspond to that. So I wrote that in my book, and it's it's become very popular and very traditional. However, most people don't know how to use it. So the Dharma houses are 1, 5, and 9. They correspond to the fire signs. So if a person has very prominent 1, 5, and 9, they're likely to have a strong dharma, strong purpose in life. If the houses 2, 6, and 10, the earth houses, Taurus, Capricorn, if the 2nd, 6th, and 10th are prominent, they tend to be oriented toward career and money, Artha. If the desire houses, Kama, desire, not karma, but Kama, the desire houses 3, 7, and 11, those are connected to desires. And when you get a horoscope with prominent 3, 7, and 11, the combination, then the person just has millions of desires. And by the age of 35 or 40, they've done this and they've done this and they've done this. They don't know what to do because they've done it all. They're so active and they follow desires. And then moksha would be 4, 8, and 12. The desire houses are the 4th, the 8th, and 12th. Now, the problem with this is that a lot of times astrologers can look and see, And by the way, there's many horoscopes where it won't, where neither of those is particularly dominant. They could all be equal. So it's not always, I don't always mention it. Sometimes I mention it because it stands out. But here's the problem. Problem is, the astrologer sees 2 planets in the 2nd house, 2 planets in the 6th house, and a planet in the 10th house, and they say this is a money chart. And that'll have some accuracy. But Ketu could be right on the ascendant, which is spiritual. The ascendant ruler could be in the 8th house, aspected by Jupiter. The 12th house might be the strongest house in the horoscope, simply because the ruler of the 12th house is exalted in the highest degree of exaltation and aspected by 2 benefics. So what they don't realize is there is what I call it in the book is Dharma-Arth-Kaam-Moksha, the general and the specific. The general and the specific. So the general is looking at those houses. Are they prominent? The specific is look at the horoscope and see what's going on in the horoscope aside from that general, like that. Another thing I want to mention is the early and weak degrees. The first 6 degrees and the last 6 degrees, they're considered to be infancy or death state, old age and death, or infancy or childhood. So those are worth looking at, but to me, using 6 degrees is a bit much. I am more concerned whether they're in the first 3 or the last 3. And those will be weakening. However, it's when a planet is in 0 degrees or 29 degrees that it becomes absolutely critical and often devastating. If a planet is in the last degree or the earliest degree, it is a huge problem. When I noticed this very early on in my practice, that when the ascendant was in 0 degrees or 29 degrees, the people that were adopted, their parents put them up for adoption, they often have a 0 degree or a 29 degree ascendant. And it weakens. What it means is that they had no charisma. They have no charisma. They have no sense of self to grab the parents' attention, so they give them away. However, when you're looking at the ascendant, again, you have to be careful. It might say 0 degrees or 29 degrees, but you have to look at the birth time and see, is it likely to be accurate, like that. But if a planet is in 0 degrees, it can be very weak. And if the ascendant is in 0 or 29, no matter how strong everything else is, if that ascendant is 0 degrees, that person's going to have a big lack of confidence. They're going to have a serious lack of confidence. There's going to be an emptiness or a void where the confidence should be. It's possible Jupiter or Venus or something could be aspecting that 0 or 29 degree ascendant, but it's unlikely. I don't remember seeing it, any of those. Anyway.
So what if the planets are 0 degrees or 29 degrees, these critical degrees? If just the planet is
that planet becomes weak.
Okay.
It just won't function. I don't care if it's 3 degrees, it's not so bad, 4 or 5, that whole 0 to 6 and 24 to 30. I don't care if they're 3, 4, 5 degrees. But when they're 0 degrees, you can't get, like, I would say, oh, Venus is in the 11th house and it's fantastic and blah, 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 but it's in 0 degrees and it just doesn't produce. And you make the statement and you're inaccurate.
Correct.
So that's where you want to be careful. I want to go over one other sutra and then we'll get to Uranus. This is a sutra that will probably, it'll probably help 10 or 15% of the people that hear it. 85% it'll go in one ear and out the other. But I'm going to say it, okay? You can't fix a problem by changing someone else. It won't work. So you get these clients who come in, my boyfriend left me, he's a liar, he's a this, he's a that. But the common denominator is the person that chose that partner. Now, if they have that happen once, that's different. But most of the time, people come in and they have the same pattern. Over and over and over, they choose a bad partner. Over and over, they have trouble in the workplace, whatever it is. And so the problem has to be fixed inside. The person has to fix him or herself. So when a client is suffering, it has to be explained to them that the suffering is theirs and they can control it, they can work with it, they can improve it. They'll never change the situation, not likely, and they'll never change the other people around them. So you focus within, and then when you start to focus within and you start to fix whatever problems are within you, suddenly the other people start to change their behavior. That's the only way it will possibly happen. They won't always change. But if you're suffering, you have to look inward, you have to look at the self. And most of the times in those situations, if it's a pattern, it's going to go on till you die unless you get outside help. And when you have clients who say, oh, yes, I'm working on that. Who are you seeing? Oh, I'm doing it myself. It'll never work. It just won't work that way. You have to get outside help. And some cultures, of course, look at that getting outside help. They think it means they're crazy. You could think that, you could figure that if you want. But you know what? I don't care if somebody thinks I'm crazy. If I can fix my suffering, that's all that matters to me. They could think what they want. Okay, so Uranus. So Uranus is a planet of change. It rules electricity. You know, think about electricity. You know, like if you get shocked, it's very, you know, erratic, volatile. That's Uranus. So Uranus causes changes. It's the planet of astrology. It's the planet of everything that is ahead of the times. So Uranus was considered the planet of air travel because it was such a new, inventive, you know, air travel. It's becoming old now, but so natally speaking, if Uranus is in the first house, the person's going to be very independent. They're not going to care what other people think. They're going to be independent. They're also going to be restless. They're going to want freedom. They're not going to follow rules and regulations. It just doesn't matter to them. They're going to be brilliant. They're going to be ahead of the times, and they're going to think outside the box. Somebody says, you can't do that. That's never been done before. That has nothing to do with anything for them. They're going to try and do it anyway. Those people, if you're having a relationship with a person that has Uranus in the first house, it won't be easy if you expect them to be compromising all the time, or if you're expecting them to be a certain way, you're wasting your time. They're going to behave the way they feel that they want to behave. It's going to be all about independence and freedom. If Uranus is very strong, in a good sign, well aspected, then you're going to get the higher qualities of Uranus, which is the brilliance, the thinking outside the system. You know, you're going to get the better qualities. If it's afflicted, if it's aspected by Mars or Saturn, then you're going to get some very bizarre results. The first thing is defensiveness. They will be defensive. You'll say something, and they'll immediately take it the wrong way, and they'll start to get defensive. That's just the way Uranus works when it's afflicted. They can also be stubborn beyond comprehension, especially if it's afflicted. If it's with Mars, it will be just gigantically, the person will just be really stubborn. They're just going to do it their way. They'll also be very unsettled. If it's Mars Uranus, they'll be very unsettled.
Hot-headed, angry, hot-headed.
Yeah, hot-headed, angry, but always moving around. They can't sit still. Things like that. If Uranus is in the second house, the person's they're not going to be conservative with their money. Like I have Uranus in the second house, and I love to speculate on gold and silver, which is the most volatile of all commodities. Well, all the commodities are volatile. Well, no, not. Gold and silver is more volatile than most commodities, but it's very, so if you have Uranus in the second house, you want to see money go up, in a big way. So you're willing to take risks. I remember in the 2000s, I found out about this investment in silver. It was such a phenomenally good investment. The risks were small. The potential profits were huge. It was so obvious, but I have Uranus in the second house. I'm willing to take a risk. I remember telling some people about it, friends and neighbors and stuff like that. They just couldn't bear the idea of risking anything. So Uranus in the second house makes money go up and down, and it makes the person have a more exciting relationship with money and finances. With Uranus in the second house, this is more of a Western delineation, but the second house is money, but it's also values. It's not confidence, but it's how you value. What am I worth? Am I worth a lot? Am I worth a little? So a person with Uranus in the second house, their values, their sense of self-value can go up and down and things like that. But mostly it's about up and down monies and the ability to take risks. That's, as much as I would say. If it affects education, because the second house in the Hindu chart is education, then it might mean some ups and downs in the educational sphere. But I haven't really looked, for me, I haven't really looked at Uranus in that sense. But you have to use these planets because you're going to find things you won't otherwise find. Uranus in the third house. Now,
so what about family in the second house, Uranus, if they have?
Yeah, it could have an effect there, but I'm not sure that I've seen it from experience. I mean, my experience is that when I see Rahu and Ketu in the second house, Rahu or Ketu or Saturn and Mars, those to me are the most damaging things. If Uranus is in the second house for family life, it's a malefic. All the outer planets are considered malefics, but it might make family life more up and down, but not necessarily bad up and down the way Rahu or Ketu does, like that. Uranus in the third house is going to create ups and downs with brothers and sisters. And this could mean having brothers and sisters that are brilliant and eccentric and out of the ordinary, but it could also mean having siblings that are stubborn, independent, hard to deal with. It could mean things like that. In the Western system, the third house is the mind. In the Hindu system, the fifth house is the mind. And the third house is creativity, the arts.
Skills.
Yeah. So it's hard to say what that's going to do in the Hindu system other than the brothers and sisters and relatives that's going to be out of the ordinary things there. And it could mean having a sibling that is very talented and special, but it's a malefic by nature. So it leans a little bit more towards, eccentric, problematic, stubborn, leans more towards that, I would say. And the person might not have a very traditional relationship with relatives, with not just siblings, but relatives in general.
Right.
There could be something there. Uranus in the fourth house is a difficult placement because you can't get hold of your mother. The mother is up and down. The mother is eccentric. The mother could be crazy. I'm not saying they're all crazy, but if Uranus is in the fourth house, then the mother is unstable or volatile. The mother could be brilliant, but again, it's a natural malefic, so it's more likely that the person will say, oh, my mother was, when I was growing up, she was doing business over here and there, and she was going away, and I couldn't find, it's just, it's a very unsettling with the mother.
Position.
Yeah, it's not what you want. What you want from a mother is something like the moon, a mother who is nurturing and taking care and helping you, and and with Uranus, the mother's doing whatever the heck she wants to do. She's not caring about anybody in particular. She's caring about what she wants to do. So that's not a very easy placement. The other thing is the person's likely to move a lot. They're just likely to move around. I lived here for 3 years, but then I wanted to move. They just move.
Changing places, because it is fourth house also indicates properties.
Yeah.
So ups and downs there.
And it also means that their home, when you go into their home, it might not be the traditional home. It might be that you go into their home and there's antiques all over the place. Or you go into their home and
too many electric items.
Yeah, electric items, or they treat it like what is it? Where you build inventions, where you do inventions. Their home may be. It may not be as conventional as you're expecting. Uranus in the fifth house is not going to help with children. It could make children inventive and creative, things like that. It's not going to be very helpful for investments, because it's going to be very up and down with investments. It can be very up and down with children. It can be very up and down with love affairs. Love affairs aren't going to matter if you're arranging marriages, but in America, where you have affairs before you get married, that's the fifth house. So you may be attracted to partners that are very Uranian, very eccentric, out of the ordinary, up and down, very brilliant. But it's not such an easy placement for love affairs or investments or children. It might be good for creativity and brilliance and artistic brilliance. It could be good. It could be good in that way. The fifth house is the natural house of Leo, and Leo is it's ruled by the sun, which is the soul. So the fifth house is an important house in terms of your identity. The first house is your identity, but the fifth house has a lot to do with self-expression. So it makes artists, because you're expressing what is inside of you. That's what an artist does. They express what is inside, and they want it to come out, and to come out, and to come out. And so I think that Uranus would make up in the fifth house, would make a person extremely creative, but also when they look inward to find out who they are, because it's a self-expression, there's going to be a certain amount. It's not the same as Uranus in the first house, which is person's completely Uranian. And of course, when I say first house, the closer the planet gets to the ascendant, the more it's going to have a big effect. But when Uranus is in the fifth house, I think that person has a lot to create. They have a lot to draw on, and it will change and change throughout all of life. So it's kind of interesting placement.
So the creations will be very futuristic. Is it that because it is a futuristic planet?
Say that again?
You said Uranus is a futuristic planet. So the
Yeah,
creations can be like
yeah.
something
Oh,
very
yeah.
like
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. The person with Uranus in the fifth house, they're not going to create traditional things. They're going to
things.
create things that are
Yes.
really, really out of the ordinary. Yeah, for sure. Uranus in the sixth house is going to be a complete need for freedom in the workplace. So if you take a person with Uranus in the sixth house and you put them in a job with a boss, they are not going to like it. They need freedom in the workplace. They must have freedom. Even if you get a transit of Uranus in the sixth house, you're going to need freedom for 7 years while it's transiting the sixth house. But if it's in there natally, that person wants to have independence and freedom within the workplace. The other thing it's going to do is it may create some vulnerability on the physical health level. And what they will experience is spasms, muscles cramping, spasms, things like that, But Uranus in the sixth house, it's not going to help the health. So the thing is that when you're doing a Hindu Vedic chart and you're looking at the houses and the planets without those Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, if you find a house that's afflicted, and then you put Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto there, it's absolute confirmation that this is going to be a serious problem throughout life. If you have an afflicted house and Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are there, those planets are not going to turn it around and make it better. Those are clear indications that you have serious karma going on. Okay? So, if you look at people that have Uranus and Neptune and Pluto in their houses, they usually have problems in those houses. If the Hindu horoscope is not indicating problems, and then you have one of those planets there, then you've got more of a chance. Pluto in the second house can be huge wealth. Pluto in the 10th house can be, Pluto, not Uranus, can be huge career fame, but not if there's a Uranus, Neptune, or if the Hindu horoscope is indicating those houses are rough, you can bet that those things are not going to be something on the positive side. So Uranus in the sixth house is a pretty simple placement. It's going to affect your workplace and your health. That's basically, I would say, it. Now, if the sixth house is bad, then that Uranus could mean enemies, jealous people, competitors. It's possible. Uranus in the seventh house is one of the most difficult placements for marriage of all, because you're talking about the planet of independence sitting in the house of compromise. I mean, what is it that gives a good marriage is two people compromising. There's no compromise when Uranus is in the seventh house. You want independence and you want freedom. So if you have Uranus in the seventh house, it means that you need freedom and excitement. Otherwise, there's going to be divorce. Now, problem with this is that most people, we have a culture, all the cultures, they all consider, well, I shouldn't say all of them. There's some cultures that might be where anybody can sleep with anybody and you have a kid and the group, takes care of the kid. But in most of the cultures, it's not like that. So this becomes complicated. It becomes complicated on the psychological level. The person believes that within marriage, it has to be traditional and it has to be one-on-one and it has to be, there could be jealousy and all this stuff. And so they know that from the culture that the marriage is supposed to be a certain way, but in their whole being, they are wanting freedom and independence in their marriage. So what they wind up doing, not on purpose, what they wind up doing is they wind up going after partners that are married, that are incapable of commitment, that are taken, that will never marry. And that way, they have the person that they love, and they don't have the
Binding of
the binding and the jealousy and the possessiveness. They don't have that. So they're happy on that level, but they're miserable because they're not consciously doing that. The need for freedom is so great that they go after people that won't be committed. And then they don't understand, why am I choosing partners that are incapable of commitment? And that's why. So in those cases, I have to, and that's also when Uranus is with Venus, conjunct Venus, it's the same thing. But then you have to explain to them that, you know, in the same way, like I remember my son, he was about 8 or 9 years old, and the neighbors took him to Disney World, and they said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I want to make money. I want to make money." And so, "What about music?" And he said, "No, there's no money in that." And they tried to tell, they tried to explain, listen, money's not the most important thing. But in his horoscope, the North Node is in the second house. Money is very important. So for this person, freedom and independence is critical. They have to have that. So you have to explain to them, there's nothing wrong. In the same way, there's nothing wrong with wanting money if that's what you're, you know, if that's right for you. There's nothing wrong with having independence and freedom within a relationship. So that means you can have a partner that says, well, we'll get married, but you have to understand, every other month I go traveling. The person goes, oh, that's fantastic. Because they don't want to be, you know, smothered. So it's a very tough
situation. Yes.
Yeah,
Uranus is in the 7th.
Yeah. Now, I often tell people like that, go, you know, to find a partner, go to astrology conferences. Astrologers are either going to be Uranian, Neptunian, or Plutonian, but Uranus is the planet of astrology. Go to there and you'll find some people that have Uranus in the first. You know, I mean, I'm not saying go and look at their horoscopes. I'm telling you, if they're astrologers, something's going on with Uranus.
Okay.
It's the planet of astrology. I tell them, go. I don't know if there's such a thing as an inventors convention, but if you go somewhere where there's all these inventors showing their inventions, they're not Plutonian, they're not Neptunian, they're Uranian. So you try to find the people that are exhibiting the Uranus tendencies, you know, like that. But if the person can simply accept the fact that they need freedom in a relationship and not be defensive about it, then they can go and make that happen, because there's plenty of people that will say, well, I'll get married, but I don't want that traditional, you know, there are people like that. So Uranus in the 8th house, unconventional sexual activity. This is complicated because in the Hindu Vedic system, the 12th house is sex, sexual enjoyment. But the 8th house in the Western system is sex. And there is no question, you know, in the first 5 or 10 years, I didn't think anything of the 8th house with sex in the Hindu system. But as time went by, I couldn't ignore it. The 8th house is definitely connected to sexual activity. So if the 8th house has Uranus, the person's going to be more experimental with sex. They're not going to want somebody who's very traditional and prude. They will not like that. More importantly, perhaps, is on the psychological level. The 8th house represents suffering. It's a Scorpio house.
Right.
So it represents
lots of transformations.
It represents the tendency to suffer on account of attachment. So in other words, people suffer only on two accounts. One is physical pain, and the other is I can't get what I want. That's it. And so if the attachment to what they want is very strong, there's going to be suffering. I would say that a person with Uranus in the 8th house is going to go through constant changes of desires. The desires will keep changing. The attachments will keep changing. And there will be a certain amount of transformation. By transformation, I mean different ways of approaching life, different ways of what makes them happy and what makes them suffer. There'll be a certain amount of, changes and such. And I want to mention something about Scorpio because I was writing about it this morning. Very few planets do well in Scorpio. Now, that's not anything I ever read. After a certain number of decades, I said, geez, the sun seems to work okay in Scorpio. I've seen it work pretty well, I think. Mars, I think, works well in Scorpio, as long as it's not in Vishaka, the first 3 degrees of Scorpio. Then even Mars in Scorpio is ruined by that nakshatra. Person has muscle problems. They have muscles problems and fevers and it's just, and bloodstream problems. This was, Vishaka is just so rough on planets. But anyway, Vishaka is 20 Libra to 3 Scorpio. But the only planets I really see work very well is the Sun and Mars in Scorpio. All the others, they just have problems, So the 8th house matters, I think, is more about sexual. I mean, it really is largely about different kinds of sexual experiences. And I think it's very much about the, having changes of transformation takes place because of the pain that you experience from your desires or attachments. So I think that's going to go on a lot. In the 9th house, you see this a lot with spiritual seekers. They won't have the traditional religion. They'll leave their whatever religion they were raised with. They may become New Age religion. I don't know how it is for India. I just don't know. But in this country, if they have Uranus in the 9th house, they're not following the traditional religion. They're going for something exotic and ahead of the times and different like that. The Uranus in the 9th house is also going to mean that they're not going to want a traditional guru, even if they're in a spiritual, like I put it this way. Let's say that they go for Hinduism and meditation. They won't wind up in the transcendental meditation movement because Maharishi was very traditional, but they would go toward Rajneesh, who was a guru, and he would just do things all over the place. That would be more of Uranus in the 9th house. You'd go for a guru that is, not stuck with scriptures and,
not traditional.
And they will travel and travel and travel and travel. Uranus is Uranus is very movement oriented. Uranus in the 4th, you move a lot. Uranus in the 9th, you travel a lot. Uranus in the 10th house means many different professions. It means an astrologer profession. It means not caring what other people think about your profession. You're going to do what you want to do. Now, again, if there's difficulties in the Dasamsha 10th house, or if there's difficulties in the natal 10th house of the chart, then Uranus in that 10th house is going to be just problematic. They're going to have a very hard time finding their Dharma. Uranus in the 10th house can also be, it could be the father. The same way you couldn't get a hold of your mother, you may not be able to get a hold of your father. It can easily mean that the father left home when you were young. Not always, but it's typical. Or the father died. It's just something where you can't get a hold of them. They're free spirits. They're independent. They're going to do what they want, and they may not be stable. Uranus is very unstable. It's very, Uranus transits the 10th house. You're likely to change careers.
Okay.
By the way, when Uranus goes into the 5th house, by the way, that's going to be a transit. When it goes into the 5th house by transit, that person's their creativity and their artistic ability is going to explode. And if Uranus goes into the 5th house, they may have had a period with very few love affairs, and suddenly for 7 years they have a lot of love affairs. Uranus in the 11th house is going to mean that friends will be Uranian, they'll be out of the ordinary, they'll be eccentric. The eldest sibling may be out of the ordinary, eccentric. The person may enjoy groups and friends, but they don't want friends that are boring. They want friends that are exciting. They may like, group activity, and they may change friends more often than most people. They may change groups more often than most people. But I'd want to see what the natal 11th house is doing from the Hindu to see, is that going to help with side ventures and large sums of money, or is it just going to indicate problems in that area?
Right.
The 12th house, I wrote this in, I revised my ancient Hindu astrology book. I spent a year revising that, 2020. And one of the things that I mentioned there was that when I went through all the 12 houses, changing the planets in all the 12 houses. When I got to the 12th house, it was very depressing. Very depressing. I found that after 40 years, I don't know much more about Saturn in the 12th, Mars in the 12th. I pick up books and I look at what other authors say. I email my astrologer friends. I see what they say. And I still don't really know much more about it in practice. I see Saturn in the 12th house be incredibly good for some people holding on to money. And I see other people spending money like crazy. I see some people with Saturn in the 12th house being unbelievably sexually active, and I see others the opposite. I just don't see any consistency with it. So Uranus in the 12th house, I would expect it to be absolutely, this I would bet on. I would bet that the person's having lots of dreams at night, going into the subconscious mind. The 12th house in the Western, at least, is the subconscious. It's everything hidden from view. I mean, it'll be spiritual. Uranus in the 12th house can be opening up spiritual areas and things like that, but I wouldn't bet on it. But I would bet on the person with Uranus in the 12th having a lot of dreams at night, having a lot of thoughts about what happened in childhood, dredging up the experiences that they had, which are then affecting them through their subconscious. They would be more. And the other thing is, I suspect that they would be psychic. I would expect for Uranus in the 12th house and the 3rd house to be the best houses. Maybe Uranus in the 8th as well, of course, probably would. But Uranus in the 3rd and in the 12th, I think those are very psychic. My first wife had the ruler of the 12th house in the 3rd. And I remember one of my teachers, I can't remember if it was Santanam or Padia, telling me that there was something about the connection between 3 and 12 that made people psychic. And I used to have this, I used to have this very annoying experience with her. I'd say, guess how many necklaces I sold at work today? And she'd say 37.
Oh.
You know, she'd be dead on accurate.
Mm.
And I said, how would this happen? And that was the 12th ruler and the third. It's quite
Right.
something.
Very beautiful. Sir, I noticed you took 10th house as the father and not the 9th house.
Okay, so this I wrote about in the updated version of ancient Hindu astrology for the modern Western astrology. Okay, so I studied with Santanam
Yes.
in Delhi, but Santanam was from the south.
Right.
In the south, the father is the guru to the child.
Yes.
So the 9th house represents father. So I came home and I practiced that for a year, year and a half. Then I go back to India, and Padia is from the north. And he tells me that the 10th house is the father. And I say, well, that's how it is in the West. Okay. So this was a real problem. And when I wrote my book, I went to India in 1982 and 1984, and I wrote the book, my first book in 85, and I said the 9th house is the father, knowing that Padia disagreed with that, you know. And I also used in the Western chart the 10th house for the father, but I didn't know what to do. What am I going to do? What do I know? I've been in astrology for 5 or 6 years. In the Hindu system, only 2 or 3 years. So I figure I'll just go with my first teacher. He's a scholar, you know. Santanam was a scholar, so I figure I'll go with that. As the years went by, predicting the father became far less accurate than predicting the mother. And predicting the mother wasn't easy because you had the 4th house and the moon and Mercury, which never made any sense to me. When they told me Mercury was a karaka of the mother, I thought they were crazy. But I found that in experience, you could have a good 4th house, a good moon, and a horrific Mercury, and the mother was a mess. I found that often. And it took me about 30 years. One day it popped into my brain that Mercury is the nervous system, and the baby is in the mother's nervous system for 9 months. And if the mother is really a problematic figure, that kid's going to wind up with a bad Mercury. So there's a connection between mother and Mercury. Anyway, so the mother was not so easy because I would sometimes forget. I'd see a bad 4th house and moon and think the mother was terrible, but Mercury would be in the 15th degree of Virgo, and the mother was actually quite good. So it would become very, you know, it wasn't easy because I would forget Mercury sometimes. With the father, it was just really not accurate enough. I would find the 9th house and the 9th house ruler problematic, but the father was great, or the father was fine. And it would be because of the 10th house. Now, you have to understand how many things come into play here. Because now, so one of the things that happened before deciding to use both houses was that I would often see nothing wrong for the father, and I'd find a problematic Jupiter hurting the father. So this was the karaka of the 9th house. So now what you actually have is you have the 9th house and Jupiter, and you have the 10th house and Saturn. And then you have the sun. So you have the sun as the father, you have the Saturn as the father for the 10th house, you have Jupiter as the father for the 9th house, and you have 2 houses. That's 5 influence to find the father. And it's not easy. Now, you know, some people used to say over the decades, the 9th house is, they would say the 9th house is the relationship with the 9th house is the experience with the father, and the 10th house is the father's actual karma. They would try to divide it up that way. In my experience, you have to use both houses. Now, there's a possibility that the more the father is like a teacher, the more the ninth house might be your,
Most that.
like, yeah, like my child, he's 22 now. He has the sun in the ninth house, the sun, the planet of the father in the ninth house of the father with Jupiter. And, I'm a natural born teacher. I can't help that. So I was like a guru to him. That doesn't mean the 10th house doesn't come into play too. It definitely does. But if you have a father that just never teaches you anything, it might be that he's more the 10th house. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that when people ask me about the father, I tell them flat out, I'm not the best person to ask because I find it very complicated. I'll tell them what's going on with the ninth house and Jupiter and the 10th house and Saturn and the sun, and I'll tell them what I think, but I won't bet anything on it. I won't bet $1 that I'm accurate because I haven't been. It doesn't, sometimes I'm accurate, but sometimes not because it's, that's my experience. I don't go by what just because somebody teaches me or just because the scripture says this, but I have found that both houses come into play.
Yes, sir. We also have found that. But really today it was like the way you have said ninth and 10th house, it's a thought process totally built up by you that we need to look. Like in India, in Vedic astrology, we take ninth house as a father. And you
Only in the south.
Yes. And you rightly said we go wrong about the father.
What?
We go wrong about the father whenever we try to.
Because it's also, the fourth house, look at Western astrology, the fourth house is the mother
And the father.
And the 10th house is the father. And you want to know something interesting?
Yes.
Sometimes it doesn't work. And you know what the Western astrologers say? If the mother is the boss of the family, she's going to be seen in the 10th house. And also the 10th house is authority figures.
Right.
There's no other house that's an authority figure, and that's usually the father.
Yes.
So it depends where you go, south or north.
Yes. So people need to look at 9th and 10th, both to come up with a correct. And it's very, very difficult. Too many combinations, permutations, 12 houses, 12 signs, as Sir said, 9 planets, aspects. It's a difficult thing. Sir, a wonderful session today with you, with this Uranus.
Thank you. And I want to say something else about this. We all want to be correct. We all want to be right. And we all have biases. So, somebody will say, well, I use the 9th house and it works. Well, I use the 10th house and it works, right? They will say this, Well, I use the Navamsha as a natal chart and it works.
Yes.
The question is, how serious are you in getting feedback and actually determining that those things are correct? One of the things that I was just writing about in the book was I was talking about how long it takes to become a good astrologer. And I said to do anything really well, they usually say 10,000 hours. So if you do 5 charts a week and you spend 4 hours on each one, that's going to be 20 hours a week. It's going to be 1,000 hours a year. And it's going to take about 10 years to get to that point of actually being really good at something. So these these things of just, you know, believing it because, so what I mentioned there was that I said when I'm talking about the 10,000 hours, I'm actually talking about doing horoscopes. I'm not talking about scholarly study, because here's what happens. I said, you can find astrologers that can quote from the scriptures. They know the concepts backwards and forwards, but they don't practice, or if they practice, they don't get feedback. And so when you ask people, what happened when you went to that great scholar? And a lot of times they'll say, there was a lot of information, but I didn't understand what it meant. There was a lot of information, but I didn't understand what it meant. So, you know, if you want to actually be accurate and you want to actually be a good astrologer, you have to practice and you have to get the feedback. And when they say, no, it didn't work, you have to ask, why not? And look in the horoscope and find out what you did wrong.
Right.
You know, it's and this is also one other thing, and then I'm going to stop. But this is another sutra. You're doing a horoscope. You know the birth data is accurate because you can see that it's accurate, but the person is not getting any success in life at all. And there's no Saturn aspects ruining the chart. They're just not getting any, they're just not getting accuracy. And you say, what's going on? The horoscope is accurate. I can see it because I know they have 3 children or they have no children, whatever, you know, but they're not getting anything out of life. And at that point I stop and I say, what happened? And they go, what? And you go, what happened in childhood? What happened? The chart's not working because of some trauma in childhood. So the chart's not working, you know it's accurate. And you know, your first thought is, what am I doing wrong? What am I not looking at? What am I not seeing? But after a couple of minutes, you say, I'm seeing everything, damn it. I know I'm doing this right. They're not having the right result. And then you say, what happened? And then if they're going to tell you, which they usually will, you'll find out that there was some trauma and that needs to be fixed. Okay, so my pleasure.
The most humble person that you said, I cannot say about the father. No one comes and says that on this thing. So I find you most humble. Thank you, sir. It was a very beautiful session.
Okay, thank you.
Please do stay in touch. Friends, this is a wonderful session. You should see the whole of it. Uranus in all the 12 houses. A happy Guru Purnima to all of you. And thank you, sir.